He never donated a cent to charity and didn't believe in second chances, until two dancing twin girls with his face and her eyes shattered everything he thought he knew. Garrett Winslow never donated to charity. He didn't write checks for causes, didn't sponsor galas, and never offered up his name for foundation plaques or hospital wings. In fact, he went out of his way to avoid events that involved anything resembling compassion. To him, charity was a sentimental distraction for people who didn't understand how the world really worked. He built skyscrapers, not sympathy. Everything he touched turned to profit. People respected him, or feared him, but no one would have dared to call him warm. And that was just how he liked it. He was a striking man, the kind people noticed the moment he entered a room. Tall, broad-shouldered, always impeccably dressed in tailored suits. His hair, a soft cascade of golden curls, framed a face that was all angles, strong jaw, high cheekbones, eyes so piercingly blue they looked like polished glass. Everything about Garrett was sharp, polished, expensive. But there was no softness in him, not anymore. He had spent too many years in boardrooms and construction sites, too many late nights reviewing contracts and acquisitions, too much time building a world where nothing was left to chance. Kindness was for amateurs. Garrett built his empire with steel and concrete and certainty. So when he mistakenly showed up at the wrong venue that Thursday night, a charity event for children's art programs instead of the exclusive investor dinner he'd meant to attend, his first instinct was to turn around and leave. The ballroom was decorated with paper cranes and string lights, not crystal chandeliers and caviar. Children's paintings lined the hallway. A small string quartet played an overly cheerful tune near the entrance. It wasn't his scene. He took a step toward the exit, irritated with his assistant, already composing the scolding email in his mind. But then, just as he turned, the lights dimmed and a voice announced the next performance. From the Hope Studio Ballet program, please welcome Emma and Evie Moore. The audience clapped politely. Garrett barely registered the names. He wasn't listening. Until the music started. Two little girls stepped onto the stage in matching white ballet dresses. Their golden curls shimmered under the spotlight. Their faces, round, angelic, completely identical, were filled with a calm, concentrated grace far beyond their age. And their eyes. Blue. The exact same rare, ice-clear blue he saw every morning in the mirror. Garrett's body locked. He couldn't move. Couldn't breathe. The girls danced with flawless synchronicity, spinning and leaping across the stage with surprising confidence. The room faded around him. There was no orchestra, no audience, no clinking of wine glasses. Just them. These two perfect, impossible mirrors of himself. And yet, he had never seen them before. He told himself it couldn't be real. That the resemblance was a trick of the light, that children often looked like adults, that it was coincidence. But he knew better. It was more than a resemblance. It was recognition. His jaw clenched, and his hands curled into fists at his sides, not from anger, but from something else, shock, maybe. Or fear. As the performance ended and the room erupted in applause, Garrett didn't clap. He simply stared. One of the girls gave a small bow, and as her arm moved gracefully toward her side, the light caught on something silver around her wrist. A bracelet. Delicate, thin, and shining. A shape and style that twisted something deep in his gut. He had seen that bracelet before. Years ago. And suddenly, everything he thought he knew about his life began to crack. The applause faded into a soft murmur, but Garrett remained frozen in place, his eyes locked on the two girls as they left the stage, still hand in hand. His mind refused to process what he had just witnessed. The resemblance was too precise, too perfect. It wasn't just their eyes or the way their curls bounced with each step, it was something deeper, something instinctual. A pull. A recognition. And that bracelet. That damn bracelet. A thin silver band, barely noticeable unless the light hit it just right. But he had seen it before. Years ago. On the wrist of a woman whose name he had almost managed to forget. He moved without thinking, weaving through the crowd, ignoring the polite conversations and curious glances as he followed the hallway toward the backstage area. A volunteer tried to stop him, but he brushed past with a cold look that didn't invite argument. He wasn't a man used to being told no. His shoes clicked against the polished floor as he rounded a corner and found a small corridor where children were gathering after their performances, laughing, hugging their instructors, their parents. And then he saw her. Not the girls, though they were there too, seated on a bench, sipping from juice boxes, but the woman beside them. Late 20s, maybe early 30s, with a dancer's posture and a tired kind of beauty. Auburn brown hair pulled into a messy bun, dark circles under her eyes that didn't hide the quiet fire in them. She crouched down to adjust one of the girl's ballet slippers and whispered something that made them both giggle. Garrett approached slowly. He didn't know what he was going to say, didn't have a plan. He just knew he had to know. The woman stood up as he got closer and looked at him, puzzled. She didn't seem to recognize him, which somehow made it worse. "Excuse me," he said, voice low but steady. "Those girls, are they yours?" Her expression shifted immediately, defensive, protective. "Why do you ask?" Her tone was firm, but not rude. Garrett hesitated. "Because they look exactly like me." There was a pause. A deep, stretching silence. One of the girls, Emma, he thought, looked up and blinked at him with wide, curious eyes. The other kept sipping her juice, unaware of the storm gathering in the adult world. The woman straightened, arms crossed now. "I'm their aunt," she said. "Their mother was my sister." Garrett's heart pounded. "Was?" "She passed away," the woman said. 6 years ago. During childbirth." He felt the floor tilt slightly beneath him. He had assumed, no, not assumed, hoped, that the mother would be someone he could confront, someone who could explain. But the thought that she was gone, that she had died bringing them into the world, tightened something sharp in his chest. "I'm sorry," he said, and he meant it. "I didn't know." "What was her name?" The woman studied him, trying to read something in his expression. "Maggie. Maggie Moore." The name landed like a punch to the gut. Garrett had only known her for a short time, but he remembered the way she danced, the sound of her laugh, the softness in her voice when she said his name. They had spent one whirlwind weekend together, years ago, in a haze of music, wine, and something dangerously close to love. He never saw her again after that. He never looked. And now it was too late. "I knew her," he said quietly. "A long time ago. We were, together. Briefly." The woman's eyes narrowed. "And your name is?" "Garrett Winslow." She inhaled sharply. You're him." There was recognition now. Not from a photo or a memory, but from the stories her sister must have told. "She mentioned you. Once." Garrett nodded, overwhelmed. "And the bracelet?" he asked. "The one your niece was wearing." It looked like. "It was Maggie's," the woman said. "She wore it every day until she died. She gave it to Emma right before the girls turned 5. Told them it was from someone special." He swallowed hard. His past had never caught up with him like this. It had always been something he outran. But now it stood in front of him, sipping juice and smiling with the same crooked grin he had at that age. "Do they know?" he asked, barely above a whisper. The woman hesitated. "They know their mother loved someone very much. They don't know his name." Garrett looked down at the girls again. They weren't afraid of him. Not yet. They looked at him the way children look at anyone new, curiously, openly, without judgment. There was still time. "I want to know them," he said. "If you'll let me." The woman's eyes softened slightly, but the wariness didn't leave her face. "They've already lost enough. I won't let anyone else disappear on them." "I'm not going to disappear," he said, and this time, he wasn't just making a promise. He was making a vow. Garrett didn't sleep that night. He sat in his penthouse, surrounded by silence and glass, the city lights outside casting reflections he didn't recognize anymore. The bracelet, the girls, Maggie's name echoing in that quiet hallway backstage, every moment replayed over and over in his mind, refusing to let him rest. His chest ached in a way he hadn't felt in years, not since before he learned to bury anything that wasn't useful. But this wasn't something he could compartmentalize. He couldn't file it away under distraction or irrelevant. These girls weren't strangers. They were a part of him. By morning, he was already on the phone with one of the most discreet private investigators in New York, giving the man only two things: Maggie Moore's name and the year she died. He didn't tell him why, just that it was urgent. Within 48 hours, the file was in his hands. Garrett didn't know what he expected, but the report hit harder than anything he'd imagined. Maggie had died in a small local hospital after unexpected complications during childbirth. No father was listed on the birth certificates. Lauren Moore, her older sister, had stepped in as guardian immediately. No legal disputes. No questions. No extended family had come forward, and the girls had remained in Lauren's care ever since. They'd moved 3 times, always in modest neighborhoods, never far from dance schools or community centers. Lauren had taken on multiple jobs over the years, teaching, cleaning, whatever kept them fed and together. Garrett read the report twice, then set it down and stared out the window for a long time. Guilt was unfamiliar territory for him, but now it settled like an anchor in his gut. Maggie had died alone, giving life to 2 children who would never know her. And all the while, he'd been in boardrooms, winning awards, breaking records, convincing himself that his past didn't matter. He didn't want to just show up again without a plan, so he reached out to Lauren through a quiet channel, an assistant of hers from the studio who agreed to pass along a letter. It wasn't long or dramatic. He kept it simple: he wanted to help. Financially, emotionally, however she would allow. He wasn't asking to take the girls away or to disrupt their lives. He just wanted to be present. Lauren didn't respond immediately. But 4 days later, she called. Her voice was wary, but not cold. She told him the girls had asked about him, Emma, especially. She said the bracelet had become something sacred to them, a link to a story they didn't understand but deeply believed in. Lauren didn't promise him anything, but she agreed to let him visit. Not alone. Not yet. But he could come to the studio, observe quietly, and maybe, just maybe, begin to build something that looked like trust. The following afternoon, Garrett arrived early. The studio was small and worn around the edges, but it was filled with life. Kids giggled in the hallways, teachers offered gentle corrections, soft piano music drifted from one of the practice rooms. It was nothing like the steel and glass world he was used to. And it was beautiful. He stayed near the doorway, watching from a distance as the twins stretched at the bar. They moved in perfect sync, their expressions focused, their golden curls pinned back in matching buns. They hadn't seen him yet. He didn't want to startle them. Lauren approached him a few minutes later, arms crossed but a little less guarded. "They've had good days and bad," she said quietly. "They don't understand everything yet. But they're curious. Especially Emma. Evie's more cautious. She watches people before she lets them in." Garrett nodded, unsure what to say. He wanted to ask 1,000 questions. What were they like when they were babies? What was Maggie like in her final days? Did they talk about her? Did they talk about him? But he held it in. When class ended, the girls ran off to change, and Lauren offered him a moment to speak with them in the lobby. It was brief. Polite. Emma said hi first. Evie waved from behind her. He didn't try to touch them or push too hard. He just knelt to their level and said, "I'm glad I got to see you dance. You were both amazing." Emma smiled shyly. "Do you dance?" Garrett laughed softly. "Not even a little." She giggled. Evie stayed quiet, but she didn't look away. It wasn't a breakthrough. It wasn't dramatic. But it was a beginning. And for the first time in his carefully controlled life, Garrett felt something he hadn't expected. Hope. Garrett started visiting the studio regularly. At first, he kept his distance, standing quietly in corners, nodding to the instructors, never interfering. The girls began to notice him more. Emma would glance over her shoulder while stretching, flash a quick smile when she caught him watching, and then turn back to her routine like nothing had happened. Evie was slower to warm up. She rarely looked directly at him, but she never avoided him either. She observed him quietly, the way cautious children often do, with wide eyes and questions she didn't know how to ask yet. Lauren kept her promise, allowing him to be present but monitoring everything closely. She never left them alone with him, and Garrett didn't push for that. He knew he hadn't earned anything yet, not really. He was a stranger trying to undo a silence that had lasted nearly 7 years. And he understood something now that he hadn't before: being there wasn't about showing up once or twice with grand gestures. It was about consistency, humility, patience. Things no one had ever required from him until now. He started bringing small things. A new box of art supplies when he noticed the girls using worn-out crayons. Fresh leotards in soft pastel colors, careful to buy matching sets for both. He asked Lauren first every time. He didn't want to overstep. He didn't want to look like he was trying to buy their affection. But the girls didn't see it that way. They began to approach him after class, slowly at first. Emma asked questions, about his job, about buildings, about whether he'd ever been to Paris. Evie listened, and sometimes, she'd whisper a single-word comment to her sister and then smile when he responded. One rainy afternoon, Garrett offered to drive them home when Lauren's car wouldn't start. She hesitated, but the storm was getting worse, and the girls were already soaked from running to the studio entrance. In the car, Emma sat in the front seat, peppering him with questions about everything on the dashboard, while Evie stared out the window, quietly watching the rain streak across the glass. Garrett told them about his first building project, how he had once been terrified of public speaking, how he used to sneak out of piano lessons as a child. They laughed. It was small, silly stuff, but it was real. Later that week, he showed up at the studio with a surprise: a miniature-scale model of a building, designed with little ballet dancers carved into the facade. "I thought maybe someday you'd like to help design something like this," he told them. Emma beamed. Evie stepped closer to study the tiny details. Lauren stood in the doorway, arms folded, watching everything unfold. Her expression was unreadable, but she didn't stop him. Eventually, Garrett was invited to their recital. It was a big moment, one Lauren hadn't offered lightly. He dressed in a simple navy sweater and jeans, trying not to look like a man who once lived in custom-tailored suits. The auditorium was packed, full of parents and teachers, music echoing off the walls. When the twins took the stage, Garrett's breath caught. They moved in perfect harmony, every step light and deliberate, their faces filled with quiet joy. He didn't know anything about ballet, but he knew what pride felt like. And it hit him with a force he wasn't ready for. After the performance, Emma ran straight to him. "Did you see? Did you see us?" she asked, cheeks flushed and eyes shining. Garrett bent down and pulled her into a hug without thinking. She wrapped her arms around him without hesitation. Evie approached more slowly but stood beside him, close enough for her shoulder to brush against his. He looked down at them both and smiled. "You were incredible," he said. "I've never seen anything so beautiful." Lauren came over, holding their coats, and something in her expression had changed. Not completely. Not surrender. But something softer. "They talk about you," she said quietly as the girls ran ahead. More and more every day. Garrett nodded. He knew what that meant. They were letting him in. Not all at once, and not without fear. But they were opening the door. And this time, he was staying. As the weeks passed, Garrett's presence became part of the girls' routine. He was no longer just a figure in the background or a mysterious adult who watched from the sidelines. He was the man who waited for them after class, who asked about their day, who remembered which of them liked strawberries and which hated them, who carried their bags when they were tired and tied their shoelaces without being asked. There was still distance, especially with Evie, who remained more guarded, but even she had started to offer quiet smiles and small nods in his direction. Emma, in contrast, had fully embraced his presence. She told him about her dreams, her classmates, the way she wanted to go to Paris and dance on rooftops. She drew pictures for him, little crayon sketches of buildings with wings, stages in the clouds, and once, one that made him stop breathing for a moment, a family of 3 holding hands under a tree. She had labeled them in shaky handwriting, me, Evie, and Dad. When she gave it to him, she did it casually, without ceremony, but Garrett kept it folded in his wallet like it was the most valuable document he'd ever owned. He began to take on more responsibilities, not because anyone asked him to, but because he wanted to. He picked them up from school when Lauren was working late. He learned how to braid hair by watching YouTube videos late into the night. He helped them rehearse lines for a school play, even acting out the smaller roles with exaggerated voices that made them fall over laughing. They started calling him Dad one at a time. First Emma, testing it in a whisper like trying out a new pair of shoes. Then Evie, quietly and without eye contact, like she was releasing something she'd been holding in for far too long. The first time he heard it, he didn't respond immediately, not out of shock, but because the word hit him with so much weight he didn't trust his voice not to crack. It wasn't just the girls who changed. Garrett changed too. He stopped checking his email every 5 minutes. His phone stayed in his pocket more often. He didn't wake up thinking about quarterly profits or stock prices. Instead, he thought about whether the girls had clean ballet tights, if he had enough groceries for their favorite snacks, whether he'd remembered to sign the school form for Friday's field trip. It was a different kind of stress, quieter but more meaningful. He found himself laughing more. Sleeping better. Feeling human in a way he hadn't in years. Lauren saw the change as well. Slowly, her walls came down. They shared coffee some mornings after school drop-off. She told him stories about Maggie, how she'd dance in the living room to old French songs, how she used to believe that music could fix everything. Garrett listened more than he spoke. He wanted to collect those fragments of Maggie, to piece together a picture of the woman he never really got to know. Sometimes, Lauren would leave the girls with him for short periods. An hour turned into an afternoon. Then a whole evening. It was never spoken aloud, but the trust was being rebuilt, breath by breath. Then, one night, Garrett got a call. It was Evie's voice, soft and trembling. She had woken from a nightmare and asked Lauren if she could call him. He didn't ask questions. He just told her to breathe, that he was here, that she was safe. She didn't say much, but she stayed on the line until her breathing evened out. After she hung up, Garrett sat in silence, holding the phone in his hand like it had suddenly become the most sacred object he owned. He wasn't trying to replace Maggie. He couldn't. But he was becoming something else, something real, something steady, something that could be counted on. Not a visitor. Not a temporary presence. A father. And though the journey had been slow, filled with small moments and tentative steps, Garrett understood now that this was what love really looked like. Not grand declarations or perfect timing. Just staying. Choosing to stay, even when it was hard. Especially then. It had been nearly a year since Garrett first walked into that charity recital by mistake, and everything in his life had changed since then. He had built his world out of steel, strategy, and solitude, but now it was filled with dance shoes in the hallway, glitter-covered school projects on the fridge, and two little girls who clung to him like he had always been there. He didn't miss his old life, not the boardrooms, not the endless deadlines, not the empty victories that used to thrill him. For the first time, his success wasn't measured in numbers but in moments, like the way Evie now reached for his hand without thinking, or how Emma had started calling him Dad without hesitation, like the word had always belonged to him. But happiness has a way of drawing shadows. It started with a letter, an official-looking envelope delivered to Lauren's mailbox. At first, Garrett thought it was a mistake, until Lauren called him with tension in her voice and said, "You need to come over now." When he arrived, she handed him the letter and watched as he read it in silence. It was from a woman named Judith Carter, Maggie's aunt. Someone Garrett had never heard of, and apparently, neither had Lauren in over a decade. The letter stated that Judith had learned about the twins and intended to seek custody, citing concerns about their current living situation and the sudden involvement of a wealthy stranger claiming to be their father. She was threatening legal action. Garrett's initial reaction was fury. Where had this woman been when Maggie died? Where was she during all the nights Lauren stayed up comforting two newborns on her own? Where was she when the girls needed new shoes or medicine or help with school? He had seen this kind of tactic before, in business, when people saw opportunity and tried to mask greed with righteousness. But this was different. This was personal. Lauren, for her part, was less angry and more afraid. She knew how the system worked. She had raised the girls without official adoption, acting as their legal guardian under emergency family placement. And now that Garrett was involved, with his high profile and sudden presence, the story looked messy. The courts didn't always care about love, about effort, about sleepless nights. Sometimes, they just looked at the paper. They tried to stay calm for the girls, but children always know when something is wrong. Evie started asking if she and Emma were going to have to move. Emma clung to Garrett when he said goodnight, whispering, "You won't let them take us, right?" Garrett held her tightly and told her the truth. Not a chance. Their lawyers warned them that Judith had hired a powerful family law attorney known for using personal scandals to sway cases. Almost immediately, Garrett's past became public property. Articles began to surface. Billionaire CEO claims secret children. Cold empire builder turned sudden father. Old photos, headlines, quotes from former colleagues who were all too eager to paint him as emotionally unavailable and image-obsessed flooded the internet. His reputation crumbled overnight. Investors pulled out of partnerships. Boards requested his resignation from projects he'd spent years building. The press didn't care about truth. They wanted the narrative. But Garrett didn't fight back in the way the world expected. He didn't launch PR campaigns or hire reputation consultants. He focused on one thing, protecting the girls. He doubled down on presence. He showed up at every school function, every doctor's appointment, every rehearsal. He answered their questions with honesty, not promises. He sat through court evaluations with quiet strength and let the facts speak for themselves. He told the truth, how he hadn't known they existed, how he regretted the years he'd missed, and how he was willing to lose everything else to make sure they stayed where they belonged. The court hearings were brutal. Judith painted Lauren as unstable and Garrett as opportunistic. But then the girls were called to speak, not in front of the whole courtroom, but in private sessions with child advocates. And it was their words that began to shift everything. Emma described how Garrett made her feel safe. Evie said he never forced her to talk, just listened until she was ready. They both said the word home when they talked about him. And it was home. Chaotic and imperfect, yes, but full of love. When the judge finally delivered the decision, there was a long pause that felt like it cracked time in half. Judith's petition was denied. Full guardianship would remain with Lauren, and Garrett was granted full legal recognition as their father, with shared custody. The judge emphasized that the best interest of the children had been met not through blood alone, but through presence, consistency, and commitment. Garrett didn't smile or celebrate when he heard the ruling. He just looked at Lauren, then at the girls sitting behind her, and exhaled for the first time in weeks. There was still a long road ahead. But they weren't going anywhere. And neither was he. The weeks after the custody ruling felt like breathing after nearly drowning. There was no explosion of joy, no grand celebration, just a quiet settling, a sense that, for the first time, the ground beneath them had stopped shifting. Garrett hadn't just fought to keep his daughters close, he had dismantled the very version of himself that once believed he didn't need anyone. Now, every part of his life was built around those two little girls and the woman who had raised them when no one else did. It wasn't simple. Healing never was. But the chaos had cleared, and in its place was something real. Garrett sold the penthouse. It felt like a monument to a man he no longer was. He bought a small house in the same neighborhood as the studio, a modest, sunlit home with a yard where the girls could play and a kitchen big enough for baking messes. He didn't care that it lacked sleek finishes or high-rise views. What mattered were the tiny ballet shoes by the door, the drawings taped to the fridge, and the laughter that bounced off the walls. He painted the girls' bedroom himself, chose matching beds, and helped them string fairy lights above their windows. Emma insisted on stars. Evie wanted bookshelves. He gave them both. Lauren still lived a few streets away, but she was there nearly every day. They hadn't defined what they were now, family, partners in parenting, something more, but it didn't matter. Their connection was unspoken but deeply felt. Sometimes they'd talk for hours over coffee, sometimes they'd simply exchange tired glances over homework and dinner prep, understanding everything without saying much at all. Garrett had learned to listen. He no longer filled silences with solutions. He sat with them, waited, and let things unfold. That was the greatest gift fatherhood had given him, patience he never knew he was capable of. His old life still hovered in headlines. There were articles questioning his sincerity, analyzing his downfall, speculating on whether his reinvention was strategic or sincere. He ignored them. People could say what they wanted. He no longer measured himself by their opinions. His empire was gone, but he didn't miss it. He had traded marble floors for sidewalk chalk and never looked back. He spent his mornings walking the girls to school, waving at the same neighbors he used to overlook. He helped with recitals, chaperoned field trips, sat through endless show-and-tell presentations. The community had begun to see him differently, not as the cold mogul from the news, but as the man who showed up, every day, rain or shine, no press, no speeches, just presence. The girls trusted him now in a way that ran deeper than words. They didn't ask if he was staying anymore. They knew. One night, after tucking them in, he stood in the hallway and looked at a framed photo on the wall, a picture of Maggie, smiling with the twins in her arms. It had been taken just weeks before her death. The photo was a little faded, the frame handmade by the girls in art class, covered in dried glitter and crooked stickers. Beneath it sat the bracelet. Garrett had placed it in a shadow box, right next to a note Maggie had once written and that Lauren had found tucked in a journal. It wasn't long, just a few lines, but he read them often. If anything happens to me, I hope they find someone who sees them, not for what they are, but for who they could become. Someone who stays. Garrett wasn't trying to be a hero. He didn't want applause or redemption. He only wanted to be the man Maggie had believed might still exist inside him. And he wanted to be worthy of the trust his daughters had given him, trust built not on blood, but on showing up again and again, even when it was uncomfortable, even when it hurt, even when it would have been easier to disappear. The world outside still called him Garrett Winslow, former CEO, fallen tycoon, man who lost everything. But inside that little house with the squeaky door and mismatched mugs, he was simply Dad. And it was more than enough. Spring arrived quietly, like a whisper rather than a declaration. The air grew softer, the days longer, and the trees along Garrett Street began to bloom with tiny pink blossoms that fluttered down like confetti every time the wind passed through. It had been a full year since the night he walked into that charity recital by mistake, only it no longer felt like a mistake. It felt inevitable, like the world had been slowly guiding him toward that moment, toward the two little girls who had cracked open his life and made space for something better. Life had settled into a rhythm that once would have terrified him with its simplicity. Morning chaos was the new board meeting, packing lunches, finding missing shoes, brushing tangled hair while pouring coffee. He still made mistakes. Once he forgot Evie's dance bag and had to drive back through city traffic with a bag of leotards and snacks, arriving just as the music started, but he learned to laugh at himself, and the girls laughed with him. Even Lauren laughed more these days. She no longer looked like she was holding the weight of the world on her shoulders alone. They had become a team, even if neither of them had put a name to it. Some things didn't need names to be real. Garrett had created something unexpected in the year since his world unraveled, a small nonprofit named the Maggie Moore Foundation, dedicated to supporting community arts programs and single parents. He didn't make speeches or hold galas. Instead, he quietly funded ballet classes for kids whose parents worked 2 jobs and offered grants to women who were trying to rebuild their lives. He never put his name on anything. It wasn't about recognition. It was about making sure no child slipped through the cracks because someone believed they weren't worth the effort. One afternoon, just before the twins' spring recital, Garrett stood backstage holding a bouquet of wildflowers he'd picked himself from the park. He wore jeans and a button-down shirt, not a suit, and there was a smudge of glitter on his wrist from helping Evie fix a last-minute costume issue. The auditorium was full. Parents, teachers, friends. He should have felt nervous. Instead, he felt steady. The girls were dancing to a piece called Home, choreographed by their teacher with them in mind. Garrett had watched them practice it dozens of times in the living room, the way they moved with quiet grace, like they knew the story their bodies were telling. When they stepped onto the stage, a hush fell over the room. The music began, gentle, slow, and Garrett's breath caught. Emma and Evie moved like they were born for it, like the stage belonged to them, and as they danced, Garrett felt something in his chest shift. Not break, but open. After the final note, the audience erupted into applause. The girls took their bows, hand in hand, smiling in a way that could light up a city. Garrett stood clapping until his hands stung. When they found him after the performance, they didn't run. They walked up to him with all the confidence in the world, and Emma, grinning, asked, "Did we do okay?" Garrett knelt down, kissed the top of each of their heads, and said, "You were magic." That night, they had dinner at home, pizza and orange soda, the girls still in their costumes, glitter on the floor, laughter echoing through the house. After they fell asleep, curled into each other like they had since birth, Garrett sat in the hallway outside their room and watched them for a long time. There were no more questions in his mind. No more fear that he wasn't enough. He wasn't perfect, but he was present. He was theirs. And they were his. He passed by the photo of Maggie on the wall as he walked to the kitchen. She was smiling in that way she always had, mischievous and knowing, as if she had seen all of this coming. Next to her photo, the bracelet sat in its glass case, still shining under the soft hallway light. It was no longer a symbol of the past. It was a promise kept. Garrett poured a cup of tea, stepped out onto the porch, and let the quiet of the evening wrap around him. He wasn't chasing anything anymore. He had already arrived. And in that stillness, with the sound of crickets in the distance and the memory of his daughter's laughter in the air, he finally understood what it meant to be whole. Not because he had built something great, but because he had stayed. Because he had chosen love when he could have walked away. And that, he knew, would always be the finest thing he'd ever done. To me, the ending of this story isn't about a perfect resolution, it's about the quiet power of transformation. Garrett didn't win back a fortune, or rebuild his empire, or return to the top of the business world. What he did was far more meaningful. He became a man who chose love over legacy, presence over power, and family over fear. Watching him go from emotionally distant and self-focused to someone who finds peace in bedtime routines and glitter-covered drawings feels like the kind of arc we don't see enough, subtle, honest, and deeply human. What I love most is that the story doesn't try to erase his flaws or pretend the journey was easy. He lost things, yes, but he found something real, a home, not made of walls and wealth, but of trust, forgiveness, and the willingness to stay. And that makes his quiet, porch-lit ending one of the most powerful kinds of happy there is, the kind you earn. Adam Hale had spent years believing he had everything, wealth, power, and complete control over his life. But in a single moment, everything he thought he knew shattered. It wasn't a failed business deal or a rival threatening his empire. It was two little girls, lost and crying in the hallway of his own office building, and the woman he had never expected to see again. He hadn't planned to stop. He hadn't expected to care. But the second he met their wide blue eyes, his blue eyes, and saw the panic in her face, he knew his world had just changed forever. Adam Hale was a man who thrived on order. Every day of his life was structured, carefully planned, and optimized for efficiency. He didn't believe in distractions, didn't allow emotions to interfere with his decisions, and certainly didn't waste time on things that didn't serve a purpose. That was how he had built his empire, through focus, determination, and an unwavering belief that success was the only thing that mattered. But all of that came to a sudden, unexpected halt the moment he stepped into the hallway of his corporate headquarters and saw two little girls standing against the wall, their small hands clutched together, their wide blue eyes filled with tears. They were no older than 4, their matching dark hair slightly messy as if they had been running around. Both were dressed in simple white t-shirts, their tiny shoulders trembling as they whispered to each other. Adam was already running late for an important call. He should have kept walking, should have let security or one of the assistants handle it. But something about the scene made him pause. The taller of the two, though only by a fraction, rubbed her eyes, trying to hold back tears, while the other sniffled and gripped the hem of her sister's shirt. He let out a quiet sigh. Against his better judgment, he stepped forward. "Are you lost?" he asked, keeping his tone even, careful not to startle them. Both girls looked up at him, blinking, as if just realizing he was there. The one with slightly clear hair nodded hesitantly, her lip quivering. "We can't find Mommy," the other whispered, her voice barely above a breath. Adam frowned. He had seen plenty of children in the building before. Executives sometimes brought their kids in for a quick visit or during an emergency, but these two didn't seem like they belonged to anyone from his team. They didn't have the polished appearance of children who came from wealth. There was something different about them, something that tugged at him in a way he didn't quite understand. He crouched down, leveling his gaze with theirs. "Do you know your mom's name?" The first girl hesitated before speaking. "Mommy's name is Sophia." Adam's chest tightened. It was a common enough name, but something about it made his stomach twist uncomfortably. "Sophia what?" he pressed, trying to keep his voice calm. The girls exchanged a glance, and for the first time, the one who had been quieter spoke. "Walsh." A strange sensation crawled down Adam's spine. That name, he knew it. He straightened up abruptly, his mind racing. Sophia Walsh. It couldn't be. He turned back to the girls, his heart pounding harder than it should have. "Your mom works here?" he asked, his voice a little sharper than before. The girls nodded in unison. "She cleans," the first girl said softly. "She said we had to stay close, but we got lost." Adam's breath caught in his throat. A memory, one he had buried deep, resurfaced against his will, flashes of a woman with long brown hair and piercing blue eyes, laughter shared in the quiet of the night, whispered promises that had never been fulfilled. And then, just as quickly as she had come into his life, she was gone. No explanations. No goodbyes. Just vanished. And now, standing in front of him, were two little girls with the same blue eyes. His blue eyes. His entire world tilted on its axis. Before he could say another word, his office door swung open. His assistant, looking slightly flustered, rushed toward him. "Mr. Hale, one of the cleaning staff is searching for her children. She's in a panic." Adam didn't move, his mind still trying to catch up with what was happening. The assistant hesitated before continuing. "Her name is Sophia Walsh." The words hit him like a freight train. He looked back at the girls, who were now watching him curiously, unaware of the storm that had just erupted inside him. The pieces fit together so perfectly, so undeniably, that he didn't understand how he hadn't seen it the second he laid eyes on them. These weren't just two lost little girls. They were his little girls. And he had never even known they existed. Adam barely had time to process the revelation before the office door swung open again. This time, a woman rushed in, her breath coming in short gasps, her wide blue eyes scanning the room frantically. The second she spotted the girls, relief washed over her face, and she ran straight toward them, dropping to her knees and pulling them into a tight embrace. "Oh my God, are you okay?" she whispered, pressing kisses to their dark hair as they clung to her. "I was so scared. I told you to stay close to me." The girls mumbled apologies into her shoulder, their little hands gripping the fabric of her uniform. Adam didn't move. He couldn't. He could only stand there, watching the scene unfold before him, feeling as if the ground had shifted beneath his feet. Sophia Walsh. She was exactly how he remembered her, long brown hair slightly curled at the ends, those same piercing blue eyes, the ones that had once looked at him with warmth, now filled with exhaustion and something else, something defensive. She was wearing a simple uniform, a cleaning service logo embroidered on the chest, and that alone sent another jolt of disbelief through him. He had spent years building a life of success, years reaching a level of power and influence that most people could only dream of. Meanwhile, she had been here, in his own building, scrubbing floors and cleaning offices. With his children. His daughters. Sophia finally looked up, as if sensing his eyes on her. The relief in her expression vanished the moment she saw him. For a long, tense moment, neither of them spoke. The air between them was thick, charged with something that neither of them had prepared for. Then, quietly, almost cautiously, she said his name. "Adam." It was barely a whisper, but it carried the weight of 5 years of silence, of unanswered questions, of a truth that had been kept from him. He forced himself to breathe, forced himself to swallow the 100 questions burning at the back of his throat. "They got lost," he said, his voice lower than he intended. "I found them in the hallway." Sophia's fingers tightened around the girl's shoulders. I only turned away for a second," she said quickly, as if bracing for some kind of judgment. "I bring them with me sometimes when I have late shifts. They usually stay in the break room, but today they wandered off, and..." Adam held up a hand, stopping her. "They're okay," he said, his gaze never leaving hers. "That's what matters." Sophia exhaled slowly, as if she had been expecting a different reaction from him. She nodded, brushing a hand over Emma's hair before rising to her feet, keeping both girls close. She looked smaller than he remembered, not in stature, but in the way she carried herself. The confident, fiery woman he had once known now stood before him looking wary and guarded, as if preparing for a fight she wasn't sure she could win. Adam knew he should be asking a million things right now: why she never told him, why she left, why she had been raising his daughters alone all these years. But none of those words made it past his lips. Instead, he looked down at the girls, who were now peering up at him with innocent curiosity. "They said your name was Sophia," he murmured, his voice quieter now. "They didn't say anything about me." Sophia flinched, her fingers curling into the fabric of her uniform. "No," she admitted softly. "They wouldn't." The weight of that truth settled deep in his chest. His own children hadn't even known his name. He dragged a hand down his face, trying to keep his thoughts from spiraling. He was a man who built his life around control, who prided himself on knowing everything happening in his world. And yet, for the past 4 years, his world had been incomplete, and he hadn't even realized it. Emma shifted slightly, glancing between him and Sophia. "Mommy," she said cautiously, her voice small. "Is he mad?" Sophia's lips parted, as if searching for the right words, but Adam was the one who answered first. "No," he said, shaking his head. "I'm not mad." He wasn't even sure what he was. Angry? Shocked? Devastated? Maybe all of it. Maybe none of it. Eliza tilted her head. "Then why do you look like that?" Adam let out a breathless chuckle, shaking his head again. "Because I just found out that I have 2 daughters," he said honestly. "And I don't really know what to do about it yet." The girls blinked, their identical blue eyes widening slightly. Sophia looked as if she wanted to say something, maybe to cut in, maybe to stop this from happening too fast, but Emma spoke first. "We don't have a daddy," she said simply. The words hit him harder than he expected. Sophia flinched again. Adam crouched down to their level, his throat tightening as he met their curious stares. "I think maybe you do," he said, his voice quieter now. "You just didn't know it yet." Eliza studied him for a long moment. Then, in the way that only a child could, she asked the question that mattered most. "Are you gonna leave now?" Adam's chest ached. He knew, without needing to ask, that she wasn't just talking about today. He looked at Sophia again. For the first time since she had walked through that door, she wasn't just guarded, she looked afraid. Afraid of his answer. Afraid of what would happen next. So he made his choice. "No," he said firmly. "I'm not leaving." Eliza still looked uncertain, so he added, "Not now. Not ever." Sophia's breath hitched, but she didn't say anything. Emma's tiny fingers curled into the hem of her shirt. "You promise?" Adam nodded. "I promise." For the first time, something in the girls' faces softened, as if they wanted to believe him. Sophia, however, looked like she wasn't sure whether to believe it at all. And Adam knew, without a doubt, that proving it to her would be the hardest part of all. Adam spent the rest of the day trying to process what had just happened, but no matter how many times he replayed the conversation, it always led back to the same impossible truth: he had daughters. 2 beautiful, intelligent little girls who had lived their entire lives without knowing who he was. He had spent years building a business empire, making decisions that shaped entire industries, yet the most important thing in his life had been happening without him. The weight of that realization settled deep in his chest as he sat in his office, staring blankly at the skyline outside his window. He had always prided himself on being in control, on knowing everything there was to know about his world. But now, for the first time, he felt like a stranger in his own life. He had missed their first words, their first steps, their birthdays. He had missed everything. A knock on the door pulled him from his thoughts. His assistant, Jessica, peeked inside, her usual composed expression tinged with uncertainty. "Mr. Hale, Ms. Walsh is here to see you." Adam sat up straighter, pushing aside the emotions threatening to consume him. "Send her in." A moment later, Sophia stepped into the office, looking hesitant but determined. She had changed out of her uniform, her brown hair pulled back into a simple ponytail. There was no trace of the woman he had once known, the fiery, confident Sophia who had challenged him at every turn. Instead, she stood before him as someone entirely different, someone who had spent the last 5 years carrying a secret that should have been his to share. He gestured toward the chair across from his desk. "Sit." Sophia hesitated before finally lowering herself into the seat, her hands folded tightly in her lap. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Finally, Adam leaned forward, his voice calm but firm. "Why didn't you tell me?" Sophia exhaled slowly, as if she had been bracing for this exact question. I wanted to, she admitted. At first. His jaw tightened. But you didn't. She looked down at her hands. No. Silence stretched between them, thick with everything that had gone unsaid over the years. Adam didn't want to feel angry, but the resentment was there, simmering beneath the surface. He had been robbed of something he could never get back. Sophia finally met his gaze. When I found out I was pregnant, you were already gone. You had moved on to bigger things, bigger plans. I knew how much your career meant to you. And she hesitated, swallowing hard. I didn't want to trap you. Adam's fingers curled into his desk. Trap me? His voice was sharp now, incredulous. Do you really think I would have seen my children as a trap? Sophia flinched, but she held his gaze. I didn't know what you would have done, Adam. And I was scared to find out. His breath came in slow, measured inhales. He wasn't the same man he had been 5 years ago. Back then, maybe he had been too focused on his work, too determined to climb higher and higher. Maybe he wouldn't have been ready. But she had never even given him the chance to decide for himself. They think they don't have a father, he said quietly, his voice laced with something raw. Do you have any idea what that felt like? Hearing those words come out of their mouths. Sophia looked down again, her hands tightening into fists. I did what I thought was best for them. And what about what was best for me? His voice wasn't loud, but it carried the full weight of his frustration. Did you ever think about that? Did you ever consider that maybe I had the right to know? Tears pooled in her blue eyes, but she didn't let them fall. I thought about it every single day. Adam leaned back in his chair, exhaling sharply. He wanted to be furious with her. He wanted to yell, to demand answers, to make her understand what she had taken from him. But at the same time, he couldn't ignore the exhaustion in her eyes, the guilt she was carrying. She hadn't done this to be cruel. She had done it because she had truly believed she was protecting their daughters. That didn't make it hurt any less. He ran a hand down his face, forcing himself to focus on what really mattered. They need to know the truth, he said finally. They need to know who I am. Sophia nodded slowly. I know. Then when? She hesitated. I don't want to overwhelm them. They're still so young, and they've never had a father in their lives. It's not something they'll understand overnight. Adam clenched his jaw but forced himself to stay calm. So what do you suggest? Sophia took a deep breath, choosing her words carefully. We start small. You spend time with them, little by little. Let them get used to you before we tell them everything. It wasn't enough. Not for him. He wanted to hold them, to hear them call him dad, to make up for the years he had missed. But he also knew he couldn't rush this. If he forced his way in, it could backfire, and the last thing he wanted was for his daughters to feel afraid of him. Fine, he said at last. But I want to be involved. In everything. I don't want to be some stranger they see once in a while. I want to be their father. Sophia's lips parted slightly, as if she hadn't expected his response. After a long pause, she gave a small nod. Okay. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't what he wanted. But it was a start. And he was going to fight for every moment he had left with them. Adam didn't know what to expect when he arrived at the park the next afternoon. He had spent the entire night thinking about how this meeting would go, replaying every possible scenario in his mind. Would the girls be shy? Would they be hesitant? Would they even want to talk to him at all? He had spent years negotiating million-dollar deals, making decisions that affected entire industries, but for the first time in his life, he had no idea how to navigate what was in front of him. Sophia was already there when he arrived, sitting on a bench near the playground. She had her arms crossed, watching as Emma and Eliza played on the swings, their small legs kicking against the air. They looked so carefree, so unaware of how much their world was about to change. When she noticed him approaching, Sophia stood, brushing a strand of hair behind her ear. "You're early," she said softly. Adam gave a small shrug, his gaze drifting toward the girls. "Didn't want to be late." Sophia studied him for a moment before nodding toward the playground. "They know someone is coming to play with them today," she explained. "But I didn't tell them who." Adam's chest tightened. He understood why she had done it that way, but it didn't make it any easier to hear. His own daughters didn't even know they were waiting for their father. Sophia hesitated before adding, "I wanted to see how they reacted to you first, without pressure." He swallowed hard, forcing himself to push down the frustration threatening to rise. This wasn't about him. This was about Emma and Eliza. Taking a deep breath, he nodded. "Okay." Sophia gestured toward the swings. "Go." Adam walked forward, his footsteps slow, deliberate. The girls were too busy laughing to notice him at first, their little voices filling the air as they swung higher and higher. It was Eliza who spotted him first. She slowed her swing slightly, tilting her head as she studied him with the same careful curiosity she had shown in his office the day before. Emma followed her gaze, her bright blue eyes widening just a little. For a moment, none of them spoke. Then, Emma furrowed her brow. "Hey," she said. "I know you." Adam felt something catch in his throat. "Yeah." She nodded. "You're the man from the office." Eliza kicked her legs a little, making her swing move slightly. "The one who found us." Adam smiled, shoving his hands into his pockets. "That's me." The girls exchanged a glance, the kind of silent communication that only twins seem to understand. Emma was clearly the more outspoken of the two, because she turned back to him and asked, "Why are you here?" It was such a simple question, but it hit him harder than he expected. He couldn't tell them the truth. Not yet. He couldn't just say, "I'm here because I'm your father. Because I should have been here all along, asterisk asterisk." Instead, he crouched down so he was at eye level with them. "Your mom said you might need a new friend." Emma narrowed her eyes slightly, as if assessing whether or not he was a worthy candidate. "Do you know how to push a swing?" Adam let out a breathless laugh, relieved by the unexpected shift in the conversation. "I think I can figure it out." Eliza smiled. "Okay. But not too high." Adam positioned himself behind them, giving them both a gentle push. They squealed with delight, their laughter echoing through the park. Sophia sat back down on the bench, watching with an unreadable expression. Adam wasn't sure how long they stayed there. All he knew was that, for the first time, he wasn't thinking about work, about meetings, about anything other than the sound of his daughters laughing. By the time they climbed off the swings, both girls were slightly breathless, their cheeks flushed with excitement. Emma plopped down in the grass and looked up at him. "You're not bad at playing," she admitted. Eliza nodded in agreement. "Yeah. You're kinda fun." Adam felt something shift inside him, something he couldn't quite put into words. He had spent so much of his life chasing things, success, power, control. But right now, sitting in the grass with his daughters, listening to them giggle as they poked at the flowers around them, he realized something. For the first time in a long time, he wasn't chasing anything. For the first time, he was exactly where he needed to be. Adam hadn't expected things to feel so natural. He had assumed there would be awkwardness, hesitation, maybe even distance. But as he sat in the grass with Emma and Eliza, watching them pluck tiny white flowers and weave them into makeshift crowns, he realized just how easily they had let him in. They didn't know who he really was, not yet, but they weren't afraid of him. Emma sat cross-legged beside him, carefully looping stems together with impressive focus. Every now and then, she would pause to inspect her work, making sure each flower was positioned just right before continuing. Eliza, on the other hand, seemed more interested in collecting as many flowers as possible, her small hands full of them as she grinned proudly at her growing pile. "I think I'm better at this than you," Emma said, squinting at her half-finished crown. Eliza wrinkled her nose. "You're only better because I'm letting you be." Adam smirked. "That sounds like something a little sister would say." Emma gasped, turning to face him with a scandalized expression. "We're the same age." Eliza nodded seriously. "We're twins, remember?" Adam held up his hands in mock surrender. "Right, my mistake. So which one of you is the older twin?" Emma straightened her shoulders proudly. "Me. By 2 minutes." Eliza huffed. "But that doesn't count." Emma turned to Adam for support. "It totally counts, right?" Adam chuckled, watching the way they bickered so easily, like it was second nature. He had missed this, missed knowing them, missed being a part of their everyday lives. "If you say so," he said, playing along. "But 2 minutes isn't much." Emma beamed as if she had won an argument, while Eliza stuck out her tongue before returning to her flowers. After a few more minutes of quiet concentration, Emma carefully placed her completed flower crown onto her head and turned to Adam. "What do you think?" He studied her with mock seriousness, tilting his head. Looks pretty good. But I think you're missing something." Emma frowned, reaching up to adjust the flowers. "What?" Adam plucked a tiny daisy from Eliza's pile and tucked it gently behind Emma's ear. "There. Now it's perfect." Emma giggled, touching the flower lightly before grinning at him. "Okay, your turn." Eliza's eyes lit up as she scrambled to gather the best flowers from her collection. "We should make him one too." Adam hesitated. "I don't know if I'm a flower crown kind of guy." Emma gave him a stern look. "Too bad. You played on the swings with us, so now you have to wear the crown." Eliza nodded enthusiastically. "Yeah. It's only fair." Adam sighed dramatically. "Fine. But if anyone asks, I was forced." Both girls laughed as they got to work, carefully placing flowers together, whispering to each other as they built the crown with exaggerated seriousness. Adam sat there, letting them do as they pleased, feeling an unfamiliar warmth settle in his chest. He had spent so much of his life making decisions, controlling outcomes, making sure everything was exactly the way he wanted it. But here, sitting with his daughters, letting them decorate him with flowers like some kind of royal garden experiment, he realized something. For the first time in years, he wasn't in control. And somehow, that didn't bother him at all. When they finally finished, Emma proudly placed the crown onto his head and took a step back to admire their work. "Okay, now you look like a king." Eliza clapped her hands together. "The king of flowers." Adam chuckled. "I'm not sure how I feel about that title." Emma grinned. "Well, that's your name now. No take-backs." Before Adam could protest, Sophia's voice called from a few feet away. "Girls, it's getting late." Emma and Eliza groaned in unison. "Already?" Sophia walked toward them, her arms crossed, but there was amusement in her eyes as she looked at Adam. "Nice crown." Adam exhaled, shaking his head as he lifted the flowers from his head. "Apparently, I didn't have a choice." Sophia smirked. "Welcome to parenting." Emma grabbed his hand before he could stand. "Will you come back tomorrow?" Eliza looked up at him with wide, hopeful eyes. "Please." Adam glanced at Sophia, who watched him carefully but said nothing. She wasn't stopping them. She wasn't telling them not to ask. He looked back at his daughters, at the way they waited for his answer like it was the most important thing in the world. He smiled. "Yeah. I'll be here." Emma cheered, throwing her arms around his neck in an unexpected hug. Eliza followed a second later, and for the first time, Adam felt the full weight of what he had almost missed. They didn't know who he really was yet. They didn't know what he had been to them all along. But they knew one thing. He was here now. And he wasn't going anywhere. The next day, Adam arrived at the park earlier than planned. He wasn't sure why, maybe because, for the first time in years, he actually felt excited about something outside of work. It was unfamiliar but not unwelcome. As he sat on a bench, waiting, he thought about how quickly things had changed. Just days ago, he hadn't even known Emma and Eliza existed. Now, they were the only thing on his mind. When Sophia arrived with the girls, they spotted him instantly. Emma was the first to react, breaking into a run toward him. Eliza followed right behind her, her small arms pumping as she tried to keep up. "You came!" Emma cheered, skidding to a stop in front of him. "Told you I would," Adam said, standing up. Eliza beamed. "And you're not late." Sophia, who had been walking at a more reasonable pace, finally reached them, giving him an approving nod. "Punctual. That's a good sign." Adam smirked. "Did you expect anything less?" Sophia rolled her eyes but didn't argue. The girls immediately pulled him toward the playground, each grabbing one of his hands. "We're playing tag today," Emma announced. "And you're it," Eliza added before she and her sister took off running. Adam let out a breath of laughter, watching them for a second before jogging after them. They squealed in delight, dodging behind slides and climbing onto platforms to escape his reach. He could have caught them easily, of course, but he let them win a few rounds, enjoying their laughter as they taunted him from a safe distance. After a while, they flopped down onto the grass, exhausted but happy. Adam sat beside them, catching his breath. Sophia was a few feet away, watching with an unreadable expression. "Okay," Emma said, sitting up. "We have questions." Adam raised an eyebrow. "Questions?" Eliza nodded. "You're our friend now, so we need to know things." He leaned back on his elbows. "All right. Fire away." Emma narrowed her eyes. "Do you like ice cream?" Adam smirked. "Who doesn't?" Eliza grinned. "What's your favorite flavor?" He pretended to think about it. "Chocolate." Emma gasped. "Wrong answer." Eliza giggled. "It's vanilla or nothing." Adam chuckled. "I'll keep that in mind." The questions continued: favorite color, favorite animal, favorite superhero. He answered each one, watching as they carefully took mental notes, as if they were deciding whether or not he was worthy of their trust. Then Emma tilted her head. "Do you have kids?" The question caught him off guard. His stomach tightened, and he glanced at Sophia, who was suddenly very still. He could see the warning in her eyes, but he didn't need it. He wasn't going to drop the truth on them like this. "No," he said carefully. "Not until now." Emma frowned. "What do you mean?" Adam hesitated, searching for the right words. "I mean, I've never known kids like you before." Eliza considered this, then nodded. "Okay. Next question." Sophia exhaled softly, relaxing slightly. The rest of the afternoon passed in easy conversation and laughter. When it was time to leave, the girls hugged him without hesitation, their small arms wrapping around his waist as they mumbled quick goodbyes before running off to the car. Sophia lingered behind, watching him carefully. "You handled that well." Adam met her gaze. "I meant what I said. I'm not rushing this." Sophia nodded slowly. "I know. And I appreciate it." He hesitated before asking, "Did you tell them anything yet?" She shook her head. "Not yet. But soon." Adam exhaled. "I hope so." As he watched them drive away, he realized something. He wasn't just trying to be part of their lives. He already was. Adam had never been a patient man. He was used to making decisions quickly, closing deals efficiently, and moving on to the next big thing without hesitation. But this, waiting for Sophia to tell the girls the truth, felt like the longest wait of his life. He understood why she was hesitant. Emma and Eliza's world had always been just the two of them and their mother. To introduce a father they had never known, a father they hadn't even realized was missing, would change everything. But that didn't make the waiting any easier. The next afternoon, when he arrived at the park, he immediately noticed that the atmosphere was different. The girls weren't their usual energetic selves, and Sophia looked as though she hadn't slept much the night before. Emma was sitting on the swing, slowly kicking at the dirt, while Eliza sat cross-legged on the grass, plucking blades of grass between her fingers. There was none of the usual excitement when they saw him, no eager smiles or immediate games. His stomach tightened. Sophia met his gaze, then nodded slightly, just enough to let him know that the conversation had finally happened. His heart pounded harder than it should have. He had imagined this moment for days, had tried to prepare himself for every possible reaction, but now that it was here, he felt completely unprepared. He walked over slowly, crouching down next to Eliza first. "Hey, Peanut," he said gently, using the same nickname he had heard Sophia call her once. "You okay?" Eliza didn't answer right away. She just looked at him for a long moment, her blue eyes searching his face as if trying to piece something together. Then, finally, she whispered, "Is it true?" Adam swallowed hard. "What part?" Eliza took a deep breath, glancing at her sister before looking back at him. "That you're our daddy." His throat felt tight, but he nodded. "Yeah, sweetheart. It's true." Emma finally spoke from the swing. "But where were you?" It was the question he had been dreading the most. Not because he didn't have an answer, but because no answer would ever feel good enough. He turned to face her, his voice steady but soft. "I didn't know about you," he admitted. "I didn't know you existed until a few days ago." Emma frowned. "But how?" Adam hesitated, glancing at Sophia, who was standing a few feet away, watching closely. He could tell she was ready to step in if things got too overwhelming, but he needed to handle this himself. "Sometimes adults make choices because they think they're doing the right thing," he said carefully. "And sometimes, those choices mean that things don't happen the way they should." Eliza played with a piece of grass, considering his words. "Mommy didn't tell you?" Adam exhaled. "No, she didn't." Emma looked at Sophia, then back at him. "Are you mad?" He shook his head immediately. "No. Not at you." Emma studied him, her small fingers gripping the chains of the swing. "So what happens now?" It was such a simple question, but it carried the weight of everything. Adam shifted so he was sitting fully on the grass, facing both of them. "That's up to you," he said honestly. "I don't want to rush you into anything. I know this is a lot to take in. But I want to be here. I want to know you. And I want you to know me." Eliza tilted her head. "Like a daddy?" Adam's chest ached. "Yeah. Like a daddy." Emma kicked at the dirt again, deep in thought. Then, after what felt like an eternity, she finally asked, "Do daddies come to school plays?" Adam's lips twitched slightly. "They do if their daughters want them to." Eliza perked up. "And do they help build stuff?" Adam nodded. "Absolutely." Emma crossed her arms. "And do they like vanilla ice cream?" Adam let out a low chuckle. "Even if they don't, they'll pretend to." The girls exchanged another look, their silent twin conversation happening right in front of him. Then, as if they had reached an unspoken agreement, Eliza scooted closer and rested her small hand on his knee. "Okay," she said simply. Emma wasn't far behind. She slid off the swing, stepping toward him hesitantly before finally leaning against his side, her tiny arms wrapping around him in an uncertain but deliberate hug. Adam barely had time to process it before Eliza wrapped her arms around his other side, hugging him just as tightly. His throat burned as he closed his eyes, breathing them in, feeling the warmth of them against him. He had spent his entire life chasing things that he thought mattered: success, power, control. But in this moment, sitting in the grass with his daughters clinging to him, he realized he had never truly known what it meant to have something worth holding on to. Sophia wiped at her eyes discreetly, watching them from a distance. Adam met her gaze over the tops of the girls' heads, and for the first time, she didn't look hesitant. She just nodded, as if silently acknowledging what had just happened. They weren't strangers anymore. They were family. Adam had always believed that life was about control. Every decision he made, every path he took, was carefully calculated to ensure success. He built an empire from nothing, made his name one of the most powerful in the business world, and ensured that nothing, nothing was left to chance. But now, as he stood in Sophia's small apartment, helping Emma and Eliza put together a puzzle on the floor, he realized that the most important thing in his life was something he never planned for. The past week had been a whirlwind. Since the day the girls had learned the truth, everything had changed. They still asked questions, lots of them. Emma wanted to know every detail about where he lived, what he did, and why he hadn't figured out he had daughters sooner. Eliza was quieter about it, more thoughtful, but she had a way of watching him as if she were studying him, trying to determine if he really meant what he said. He had expected it to be difficult, but in some ways, it wasn't. They had already accepted him before they even knew he was their father. The difference now was that there was something more between them. Something real. Adam picked up one of the puzzle pieces, handing it to Eliza, who was sitting in his lap as she focused intently on finishing the edges. "I think this one goes here," he said, pointing to an open spot. Eliza wrinkled her nose. "No, that's the wrong color." Emma, lying on her stomach beside them, smirked. "You're bad at this." Adam chuckled. "I've never been great at puzzles." Eliza finally found the right piece and pressed it into place with satisfaction. "That's okay. You can practice with us." Adam felt something warm settle in his chest. "I'd like that." From the kitchen, Sophia leaned against the counter, watching them with an unreadable expression. At first, when he had suggested coming over to spend time with the girls, she had been hesitant. But when the girls had practically begged her to let him stay for dinner, she had given in. Now, as she watched him sit on the floor in his expensive slacks, surrounded by puzzle pieces and stuffed animals, he could tell she wasn't quite sure what to make of it. Emma suddenly perked up. "Can we have a sleepover at Daddy's house?" Adam's heart clenched at the word. Daddy, they had only started using it in the past day or two, and every time they did, it hit him like a wave. Sophia stiffened slightly. "Emma." Adam held up a hand, stopping her gently. "Would you want that?" he asked carefully, looking at both of them. Eliza nodded immediately. "Yes." Emma grinned. "We could build a fort and stay up late." Sophia sighed, rubbing her temples. "Let's take things one step at a time, okay?" Emma groaned. "But, Mommy." Sophia gave her a look, and Emma quickly fell silent. Adam glanced at Sophia, understanding what she wasn't saying. This was new for all of them. As much as he wanted to bring the girls into his world fully, he knew that forcing it too fast would only make things harder. "How about we plan a day first?" he suggested. "You come over, see where I live, and if you like it, we can talk about a sleepover." Emma considered this, then nodded. "Deal." Eliza yawned, leaning her head against his chest. "I'm tired." Adam instinctively wrapped an arm around her, running his hand gently over her hair. She didn't pull away. Instead, she sighed contentedly, her tiny fingers playing with the sleeve of his shirt. Sophia watched them, something unreadable flickering across her face. Finally, she pushed off the counter and walked over. "All right, girls, bedtime." Emma pouted. "But we're not done." Sophia crossed her arms. "The puzzle will still be here tomorrow." Eliza hesitated before slowly pulling away from Adam's embrace. "Can you tuck us in?" she asked, looking up at him with hopeful eyes. Adam felt his throat tighten. He wasn't sure why that was the thing that made it feel so real, but it was. Tucking them in. A simple thing, something a father did every night, something he had never done for them before. He swallowed hard and nodded. "Yeah. I'd love to." Sophia didn't protest as he followed them to their room, a small space with twin beds pushed against opposite walls, covered in blankets decorated with tiny stars and stuffed animals piled high. Emma climbed into bed first, immediately pulling the covers up to her chin. "Good night, Daddy." There it was again. Adam bent down and pressed a kiss to the top of her head. "Good night, sweetheart." Eliza waited until he sat beside her, then hesitated. "Are you coming back tomorrow?" Adam brushed a stray curl from her face, his chest aching. "Do you want me to?" She nodded. "Yes." He smiled. "Then I'll be here." She closed her eyes, satisfied with that answer. Sophia stood in the doorway, watching as he turned off the small nightlight and quietly stepped out of the room. Neither of them spoke as he followed her back to the living room. Finally, Sophia exhaled, crossing her arms. "I wasn't sure this was going to work," she admitted. Adam met her gaze. "And now?" She hesitated. "They love you already." Adam swallowed. "I love them too." Sophia studied him for a long moment. "Then don't disappear." He stepped closer. "I won't." She held his gaze, searching for something in his expression. Whatever it was, she must have found it, because she finally gave a small nod. "Okay." Adam exhaled, feeling something settle inside him. For the first time in his life, he had something real. Something worth more than all the money, all the success, all the control he had ever chased. He had them. And he wasn't going anywhere. The ending of this story is powerful because it isn't just about Adam discovering he has daughters, it's about transformation, redemption, and the realization that true success isn't measured in wealth or power but in the people we choose to show up for. From the beginning, Adam was a man who controlled everything in his life, believing that his business empire defined him. But when he meets Emma and Eliza, he is forced to confront the fact that he has been missing something far more important. The journey isn't just about reconnecting with them, it's about proving, to both them and to Sophia, that he is someone who will stay. Sophia's role is just as significant. She spent years believing she was making the right choice by keeping Adam out of their lives, but as she watches him bond with the girls, she has to acknowledge that maybe she was wrong. Her hesitation isn't out of spite but out of fear that Adam will leave, that the girls will get hurt, that the stability she built for them will crumble. Seeing her lower her guard and allow Adam in is just as much a part of the story's resolution as the girls accepting him. The final scene, where Adam tucks them in, is simple but incredibly meaningful. It's not a grand gesture, not an over-the-top declaration, but something small and intimate. It shows that love isn't just about promises, it's about consistency, about being there in the quiet moments, about proving through actions rather than words. This story is a reminder that family isn't just about biology, it's about showing up. Adam may have missed the first 4 years of his daughters' lives, but the real victory is that he refuses to miss any more. The past can't be rewritten, but the future is something he can build. And in the end, that's what truly matters.